The only thing that I am certain of is uncertainty. That is to say, I know and believe that there isn't anything I can do to definitively prove anything, not even that I'm alive. Rene Descartes says that the only thing that he can be certain of is himself. In the sense, I agree with him. How could I deny that my own thoughts and actions are evidence of my existence? But that's just it. They're only evidence, and evidence is used whenever we need to make an assumption. Nobody asks for evidence that the sky is blue or that the grass is green. Nobody asks for evidence that a dog is a dog, that a cat is a cat. Nobody asks for evidence that humans are flawed and that the universe is unknowable. They only ask for evidence of things they are uncertain of. I've never once asked for evidence of my uncertainty. What need would I have of something so apparent in my day-to-day life? I see it everywhere and in everything. Every breath I breathe and every vignette I view are proof that I can't be certain of anything. But why? Because the moment I decide that one thing is and can only be one thing is the moment that I deny its potential. To circle back to the dog example, I would ask if I'm certain that my dog, Ollie, is a dog. By all accounts, he certainly appears to be a dog. He has 4 legs, fur, 2 eyes, and a long, bushy tail. But if that was the only evidence I had, I might well assume that he's not actually a dog, but a fox or a bear. So I would then say that he acts like a dog. He loves to play, gets excited over nothing, and can't seem to stay calm for more than an hour at a time. He likes to catch the frisbee I throw for him in the yard, and he enjoys cuddling up to me while we watch TV. In isolation, I would say these are characteristics of a human child, but when I combine the actions he takes with his appearance, I can be fairly certain that he is indeed a dog. So there I have it. I can be certain that he is indeed a dog. But what happens when I stop to consider my other dogs? For example, Daisy looks extremely different to Ollie. Where Ollie has long, black, woolly hair, Daisy has short, fawn-colored hair. Daisy is shorter than Ollie, more grumpy, and prefers to lounge around and nap instead of catch frisbees and play outside. So can I be certain that Daisy is a dog? Certainly I can, for the definition of a dog is broader than the descriptions I gave for Ollie. But it wasn't until I saw the two that I needed to differentiate them by color and by behavior. If these two animals are so different in appearance and nature, then what is it that makes them both dogs? I believe the answer lies in something innate that we cannot describe with words. Words and their definitions have to be vague enough to fit more than one meaning, but they have to be precise enough to have meaning in the first place. If I didn't consider Daisy to be a dog, I would have to consider her to be some other kind of creature, and for that I would have to give her an entirely different identity. But that wouldn't make her any more or any less of a dog, it would just change my understanding of her identity. But if the change in my understanding of her identity doesn't affect any other change, then how important was my labeling her as a dog in the first place? To tell the truth, I believe it doesn't make a single difference what we call something. What matters is that thing's nature, and the consequences that are derived from it. But what does any of this have to do with being certain? How is any of this line of questioning important? What is the point and consequence of me writing this essay? The point is to illustrate the futility of certainty. In order to be certain about something, I must fully consider every single possible aspect of it, every instance, every variable, every insignificant thing that constitutes its being in relation to my own experience. This is simply impossible. It could very well be that Ollie is not a dog. But if he wasn't a dog, then what is he? He could be some form of beast that pretends to be a dog, or he could be an alien from outer space that looks and behaves exactly like any other labradoodle. Hell, it could just be that he has some sort of tiny genetic mutation that classifies him as something other than a dog, something that science and biology doesn't have a name for. There'd be no possible way to know. I could question his history. I know that we adopted him from someone, and that in order for him to exist in the first place, he would need a mother to birth him. But how can I know for certain that he had a mother in the first place? I never saw his mother. I wasn't the one that adopted him, and I can't even ask him to tell me what happened in the first place. There's simply no possible way to eliminate that doubt in its entirety, because absolute certainty only exists when doubts do not exist. And if that were the case, I wouldn't be certain of it because I never had to question it in the first place. Certainty is a concept, and concepts only exist in absence of other concepts. Take, for instance, good and bad. If I were to ask myself what good means, I would say it depends on what I mean by good. Things can only be good in relation to bad things. I can say that Ollie is a good dog because he listens well, loves affectionately, and doesn't cause much trouble. But why should I consider any one of those things to be good? What about him listening to me makes him a good dog? It could well be the case that he listens to me to go out and bite someone on the street. In that instance, there's a dilemma. To me, he listened well and executed my commands, but he also hurt someone in the process. In that case, is it a good thing that he hurt someone? The courts would likely order him to be put to death if he were to seriously maim someone for no apparent reason. Does that mean that the courts would be ordering the execution of a good dog? I would say no. It's obviously bad that he hurt someone, and by removing his ability to hurt people, we would be preventing any and all harm that he may do in the future. That would obviously only be a good thing, but only if he were guaranteed to harm someone again. We would be operating under the assumption that his existence would bring harm to others. In other words, we would be operating as though we were certain his life was a net negative for the whole world, a bad, so to speak. In this scenario, my dog, which I consider good, would be deemed bad and summarily executed. This is what creates the subjective nature of good and bad. The words have an infinite number of meanings because they are observed in an infinite number of contexts. Another concept is darkness. Darkness doesn't actually exist because darkness is the absence of light. How can this be? Science tells us that light is actually just packets of energy, photons, that are emitted by, quote, any accelerating charge, thanks Google, that our optic nerves sense and translate into electrical data. That data is sent through the optic nerve into the brain, and then the brain somehow magically transforms this electrical data into images. If this is the case, then what would darkness be? Whenever the sun goes down or I shut the lights on my room off, I'm reminded of the existence of darkness. It is merely the absence of an image. In that sense, darkness does not exist by itself. It only exists when light is there to banish it. But this means that if light didn't exist, there would be no darkness. Because if darkness is the absence of light and light didn't exist, darkness would be the absence of nothing. I recognize that I'm going off on a seemingly unrelated tangent, but there is a point to this rambling. We operate every single day as though we were 100% certain of the world around us, as though death was merely an illusion and life was eternal. Yet we have proof and evidence that death exists. I have proof and evidence that it exists, yet I'm inclined to deny its certainty. There is no way to prove an afterlife, but there is no way to disprove it either. Death is merely the absence of life, as darkness is merely the absence of let me repeat that. Death is merely the absence of life, as is darkness is merely the absence of light. Huh? Oh, I wrote this wrong. Death is merely no, I said that correctly. Ooh, I'm getting tripped up in my own essay. All right. Death is merely the absence of life, as darkness is merely the absence of light. If my life didn't exist, then my death wouldn't exist. But when my death doesn't exist, oof, this is a tough paragraph. Okay, let me start over. Death is merely the absence of life, as is darkness is merely the absence of light. If my life didn't exist, then my death wouldn't exist. But when my death begins to exist, it proves that my life doesn't exist. But my life does exist. So how can I be certain that death is real? How can I be certain of anything? The moment you become certain of something, you deny its potential. In that case, or in that sense, the moment I become certain that death doesn't exist, I deny myself any reason to move forward. If life was eternal and death didn't exist, I would have no reason to act. I would have no driving force, excuse me. I would have no driving force pushing me to make anything of myself or of the world. Yet at the same time, I would be all the happier for it. It would be wonderful and amazing if I could just spend eternity alive. Think about all the things I could learn, all the sights I could see, all the people I could meet. But then I realize These things are only precious to me now because I know they are finite. That is, I know my life is only finite, and I recognize that that fact is what gives me happiness. How could the knowledge that I'm going to die one day give me happiness? Because in order for something good to exist, something bad has to exist. There needs to be a comparison, a distinction, a judgment has to be made. If I were to be certain that life would end, I would lose hope and fall into despair. But if I were to be certain that life would never end, I would also lose hope and fall into despair. Hope only comes from a wish for things to be better. Despair only comes from a lack of hope. If things are already at their best, why should I hope for them to be better? I wouldn't, and so I would lament that life is all I have, rather than be joyous that life is all I have. To be certain of anything is to eliminate its potential. If I'm certain that my life is meaning, if I'm certain that my life has meaning, I reduce and eliminate its potential. I reduce and eliminate its potential meaning to whatever I decide it to be. If I'm certain that it's meaningless, I reduce and eliminate its potential to have any meaning to me at all. That is why the thing I can be certain of is this: I am uncertain. This does not mean that I am paralyzed or limited by uncertainty. No. It implies that I am able to think and choose with my own free will, that I'm able to learn from my horrible mistakes and draw wisdom from foolishness. I have a lot that I feel I have to make up for. I am plagued by guilt for things I did and didn't do, but I am fairly certain that I can make something out of that suffering that was inflicted onto me and that I inflicted onto others. In a way, by refusing certainty, I can learn to refuse uncertainty and act as though I was certain in the first place. That's why I will make the distinction between true certainty and partial certainty. There is only one thing I am truly certain of: uncertainty. I've said this many times by now, but there is a point. The qualifier truly leaves room for me to mostly or partially be certain of other things. I am mostly certain that my family and friends love me. I am mostly certain that there is something good I can derive from my pain. I am mostly certain that my long and arduous battle with mental illness will have a positive outcome. I am mostly certain that I can forgive myself for the people I've hurt in the past and for the times I've failed myself and others. I am partially certain that Ollie and Daisy are both dogs, but mostly certain that they love me as much as I love them. I am mostly certain that my life has meaning. I just need to forge it from meaninglessness and make it a good one, whatever that word means.